Hey there, folks. Welcome to day one of MMT Del Mar. I wanted to talk about the event format, flying information, and also the integration of special guests. This is post two or video two of a five-part series where I wanted to provide a little bit of behind the scenes, one could say, to our most recent gathering for MMT. If you're not familiar with MMT, it's an invite-only community for entrepreneurs. We've had just over 20,000 entrepreneurs apply for a community that's capped at 150 people annually, and we bring all of our members together once a year to do a 3.5 day gathering together. Our most recent gathering in Del Mar had an approval rating of 9.85 out of 10. And over the last probably 5 events, we've averaged anywhere between 9.7 and a 9.9. So Del Mar is definitely one of the more higher rated live experiences we've ever done, and wanted to do this series because if you joined us in Del Mar, this will be a little bit of a trip down memory lane. And if you find yourself in the event space or the community building space, I'm pretty sure you'll derive a lot of value from this reflection of mine, because I plan to share rather openly what went well, some of the why behind the way we lay out the event and structure sessions and that kind of stuff, and also some refinements as well, because we are always refining the MMT experience, even though we've been doing this for 11 years. Now, the last video I shared was day 0 of MMT Del Mar, the storm before the storm. So I talked about our new member welcome, Mastermind Dinners, which have both become staples to the MMT live experience. And I've also shed a little light on rolling with the punches, one could say, specifically having a significant contingent of our attendees stuck in Toronto as a result of a plane crash. So yeah, that was a hard one emotionally to navigate, but we made it through. So in today's video, I want to share some insight on event format at a high level, the evolution of that format, the importance of the opening talk, and also how we integrate surprise and delight, which I think is really unique and has a plethora of benefits, as opposed to announcing big name speakers and that kind of stuff far in advance, which is what most events do. So the overall flow of our gatherings have gone through many kind of iterations over the years. As I alluded to in the last video, MMT used to be a 2-day event, and then 3 days, and now it's kind of 3.5 days. And it wasn't until we did an event in Costa Rica in 2023, so 9 years into doing events, that we really found the perfect balance between content and community and connection time, and then also space, because all three of them have just huge importance. It's very easy, if you have a big budget, to cram a 9 to 5 schedule with like speaker after speaker after speaker. That is not hard to do, to find that balance to serve people who are any group of people. You'll have individuals who are introverted, individuals who are extroverted, individuals who deal with imposter syndrome, folks who find themselves at different stages of their journey, whether it's early in their journey, towards the end of their journey, different industries, different areas of focus. Some may not even be focused on like professional things at a certain time. They may be focused on more personal and that kind of stuff. And if you really take their experience seriously and try to make sure that it's a valuable experience from the minute they open their eyes in the morning to the minute they close their eyes at night when they're in your care, that is very much a art and a balancing act. And for us, again, it took a good 9 years to find a format that really, really works for us. And there's a couple kind of components to it when it comes to our format at a high level. So I'll walk you through, I already walked you through what the day before the official event starts, what that looks like with the new member orientation or the welcome and the mastermind dinner. But a standard day for one of our live experiences looks a little like this. So we have morning activities that take place first thing in the morning. They are optional, and I'll loop back on that because there's certain aspects of the event that are optional and some of it are mandatory. So the morning activities are optional. Those things can range from yoga to archery to meditation, sound baths, and all that kind of stuff. Then we have a extended breakfast and emphasis on the extended, which I'll loop back on. Then we have a morning session, and this is the mandatory session. This is a very much a community building type activity. Our goal when we're looking at an event is we start the day together and we end the day together. Outside of that, it's very much kind of a choose your own adventure. So we do a main session, then we have an extended lunch. Then we usually do roundtables, which are ultimately kind of peer-to-peer led sessions. And then we have something called flex time, which is space in the calendar, or space in the day where they can use that time to recharge or opt in to different activities we have available at that time. And then we have our dinner, and usually in this case, for MMT Del Mar, we had a special guest join us in the evening. And then we also tend to have some kind of after hours spot. And the after hours has become an important part, and having a space for that. I mean, it actually became clear when we did our first event where our hotel was separate from where the event was happening. And I realized every evening how those in attendance would just crowd the bar. And for us to just be thoughtful of like, well, what can people do if they continue or choose to continue to lean in from morning till night? What kind of space are we providing for them? So that is the format at a high level. Day 2 is a little different, which I'll talk about in the next video. But here's some beliefs that really shape the way we look at the format. So first one, this is an important one. The best learning doesn't always happen in the conference room. It happens in conversation. You'll often hear people reference that, hallway talks and all that kind of stuff is sometimes where they derive the most value. And for us, content is abundant. If you want to hear somebody big speak, oftentimes you can get access to, TED Talks or podcasts or whatever the case may be that you can listen to at your convenience. So it makes very little sense to bring in big name speakers who are just going to share things that they've shared on other platforms before. So for us, although we take stage time very seriously and it has a place, we also know that, and we talk about this a lot, this idea of music is the space in between the notes. So there's value to be had like in the conference room and that kind of stuff, but there's just as much value to be had over a conversation at dinner or over yoga in the morning or those kind of things. So that is one philosophy that really helps shape the way we look at format. The second kind of plays into that as well is the idea that the best networking is when you don't know you're networking. It is, and I cringe when I say the word networking, so it's worth bringing voice to that. But handing business cards and that kind of stuff is not how you forge relationships. Relationships are forged in an organic manner, and they're also over like shared unique experiences and that kind of stuff. So for us, integrating activities both in the mornings and flex time, and then when we look at day 2, which we'll talk about in the next video, those are all really great opportunities to forge kind of meaningful relationships. This one I actually brought voice to for the first time, the idea that community components are mandatory, but learning sessions are not. Again, because we have a very diverse community as far as industry, business size, areas of focus and interests, it can be rather challenging to kind of meet everyone's needs. And as a result, we've really created and embraced this choose your own adventure type format. However, there are key components of the event that are mandatory, that are in service to the community and the container, and that kind of stuff. So when we do the morning sessions, those are kind of mandatory sessions. Anything that especially involves assigned seating, it's important that everyone shows up for those things. So generally, our dinners are kind of mandatory. Our main session is mandatory. Everything outside of that is designed to be, again, choose your own adventure. This also works really well if somebody's navigating um, a lot at the time when they find themselves at the event. We've had, members that they're like, at the tail end of selling their business, and need to like dip in and out. So for them to know, like, oh, I have to be 100% committed during these sessions. And then outside of that, if I have to go back to my room and do whatever I need to do, or maybe catch up on emails, or I just need to recharge my batteries, that is available to them. So that's another kind of unique feature of how we look at format. Uh, there's also this idea that there's value in both space and structure. When you bring, let's say, 6 entrepreneurs for a dinner, it's easy to just put them at a dinner and just let conversation flow. However, I don't know what it is about me, but I almost get this like visual when I see a group of people together. If there's not a container around it, or if there's not guardrails on the conversation, then it's almost like I can visually see like wasted energy happen as a result. And at the same time, you don't want guardrails to be, or container to be, too constraining at the same time. So there is a balance, and the best sessions generally have a little bit of both. They have space for people to improvise and that kind of stuff, but they also have a structure or a North Star or guardrails. And that could be how you look at hosting a dinner. That could be an actual kind of session and that kind of stuff. And when I look at MMT as a whole, that is just something we're very, very conscious of. And yeah, it's really important. And that, again, is very much an art to find kind of the balance and that kind of stuff. We also have this, we try to bring clarity to our members, and this kind of ties into our opening session, the idea and the importance of leaning in. So being present to the magic in every moment, in every conversation. And again, that also leans on that idea of music is the space in between notes. And it's funny, I've shared that for the last 2 events. It is wild how often that comes up in the feedback forums. As far as people just say, we ask one question in our feedback forums around the idea of like, what was one of the most meaningful moments you had over the last 3 days and that kind of stuff. And people will say it was the music in between the notes. And I will say, from an ego perspective, it's a bit of a hit because I, wish it was, Jason's morning talk or whatever the case may be. But that is the beauty of highlighting and spotlighting the importance of every single minute of the event, whether it's an actual session or that space in between. So yeah, really inviting our members to lean in, be present to the magic of every moment and every conversation. And again, really hitting home that idea of the music is the space in between the notes. So don't just be present for the main sessions, but if you're in conversation, you never know if that conversation with that person that you just met can completely put you on a new trajectory. And the nice thing is, doing 11 years of MMT, we can often point back to a lot of those instances. And finally, the opening session is arguably, to me, one of the most important. And I refer to it as the container setting session. I'll go a little off script here. There's really 3 things I think that are the secret sauce of MMT. One is the curation, which I can go in depth about and probably in a future video, because it's it's a pretty elaborate process. The second is the container, which is keeping the community clear and clean and clear of any conflict or any liabilities so that people can show up and feel safe. And then the third is commitment. We have very clear kind of guiding principles for the community and almost expectations of how we all show up together when in that container, when in community. And for me, the first official talk of the event the spirit of it is to set that container. And there's a couple different facets to it, but it's something I've done since really the beginning of MMT, so going back 11 years, but it's gone through many iterations, just like every kind of facet of our events. And I think the impetus of it initially was probably Simon Sinek's philosophy of people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And for me, bringing clarity to like the why behind MMT is important, but also doing it through the lens of like how it benefits those in attendance. And over the years, I mean, especially if I look at Del Mar specifically, some key features of the container setting session. One is if I want people, and I referenced this in the last video, relationships move at the speed of trust and vulnerability. And if I want people to be vulnerable, someone needs to lead with vulnerability. So I don't do it in a manipulative way, but if there's something that is on my heart that is vulnerable and may inspire other people to show up powerfully, then I will kind of take that lead. I usually also anchor into my why, but also invite them to anchor into their why. I will ask point blank and get them to share in a group setting. What was the most enticing aspect about MMT that made you want to join? Or, you know, in effect, why are you here? There's people that we serve are busy individuals with lots of demands on their time. So for us, I want them to really anchor into some of the sacrifices they made to be there so that they make the most out of their time. Because it's very easy to go to an event. Anybody can cut a check, but to have them really lean in, play full out, and be as present as possible is no easy feat. So that is almost an invitation or a challenge that I do at that container setting session. I also show our work. And this idea was given to us by a gentleman named oh gosh, Michael Norton, who is professor of marketing at Harvard. He spoke at MMT in 2014, and I told him he should have wrote a book on this topic because it was so good. But the idea is that if you show your work, people will be more invested. In this case, kind of playing full out. Again, so we show. Some of the work we do behind the scenes to make MMT what it is, not to toot our own horn or any of that kind of stuff, but really to inspire them that this is a really unique opportunity and that they don't want to waste it. Talked about clear commitments as far as how we show up in community. One of our most important guiding principles is leaning in. Another one is removing the mask. We don't like keeping things, surface level. At the same time, we want people to feel, safe to share um, what is comfortable for them. Everybody has a different level of kind of vulnerability, and that's something we want to honor and respect. Also like to spotlight how members have shown up for each other. That's a really beautiful exercise that we incorporate into MMT, and we do it through something called praise cards. And ultimately, every single morning at the event, we fill out these praise cards as we reflect back on the last day or even the last year, if a member's been in MMT for some time, and really bring voice to another member who has shown up for them, even if it was in a little way or a significant way, and just acknowledge them. And we do this, we write out these cards. It's a really cool exercise. Write out these cards. I get some people to share within the group, which just reinforces the value of community. And then we take these cards and Candace will then ship them out 90 days later. So we collect them all. And it's a beautiful thing to receive because our members will be, back in the day-to-day grind and all that kind of stuff. And to get something in the mail and have these like 3, 4, 10 notes of gratitude for, the impact you made on somebody or how you showed up for them. It's a beautiful, beautiful exercise and just, again, reinforces the value of that space and to take it, seriously and to make the most out of it. When it comes to the container setting session for Del Mar, I'd have to review the actual recording. I've yet to get access to that, but it's, I don't have any refinements that I would make. Again, it's arguably one of the most important sessions of the event to kind of set the tone, and it's something I take very, very seriously. And it's one of those things. I think people can downplay the importance of the container setting session. Um, and it's a debate worth kind of having. However, I think it contributes significantly to that final approval rating of when the event's all said and done. It's hard to link, the actual tangible value from that session, but I really do feel strongly that it's the number one driver for how people show up during the event, and again in community. Um, Wanted to talk about the integration of surprise and delight, and I guess in this case through the lens of incorporating special guests. So one of the things that makes MMT rather unique is the agenda is blind. And this gives us great flexibility behind the scenes because as things shift, um, we can make those shifts and it doesn't impact the experience or expectations of those in attendance. What most events do is they announce a bunch of speakers and that kind of stuff. And for some reason, if a speaker can't attend, people were expecting, to hear from this person or hear from that person. Instead, with MMT, thankfully, we have enough trust with our community that they know it's not just about the speakers. They sign up far in advance, well, a year in advance in some cases, in many cases, without knowing any agenda or any speakers. And so when we have them show up at the event, the format can be different than it was last year. So we have that kind of creative flexibility. But then also when it comes to special guests, we can surprise and delight our members. So special guests can kind of fall within two categories. The first is the most logical one. It's the idea of a big name. So for us, at MMT Del Mar in the evening of day one, we had Dr. Rhonda Patrick join us. If you are familiar at all with like the health and wellness space, I mean, she's one of the few really trusted voices in health and wellness. She's been on Andrew Huberman's podcast, Peter Attia's podcast twice, Tim Ferriss's podcast twice, Joe Rogan's podcast 10 times. So I have it probably in the recording, but when I announced from the stage as we were going to do a session with her in the evening, there was an audible excitement from some of our members, which was, internally I was like, yes, that was good. So ultimately, those special guests that are big names is always a surprise and delight component. And for us, we know we've done other events where we haven't had those special guests, and we realize MMT is a hard thing to kind of explain to folks who haven't experienced the event firsthand. So as a result, when people get back home or talk about the event to friends, it can just, again, it'd be hard to share the experience. So one of the things that proves helpful is having big name special guests because people will naturally kind of talk about, oh yeah, Rhonda Patrick showed up or Gary Vee showed up or Tony Hawk showed up. So if you want to kind of create word of mouth, you have to give people something to talk about, and special guests who have profile, who have a big name, definitely kind of check that box. The flip side of that is one of the special guests or surprise and delights that excites me the most is individuals who are not big names, who kind of fly under the radar, but really just deliver a tremendous amount of value. So for this particular event, we had a gentleman named Dr. Ned Hollowell, who is one of the thought leaders on ADHD and has been since the 1980s. And people definitely loved his session. My only, no, it's not a hesitation, is I'm always excited to see, people can rate a session high and that's great. But I'm excited to see the ripple effects of specific sessions over time. And I'm very confident out of the 100 plus speakers I've worked with over the years, probably much more than that, but regardless, 100 plus speakers I've worked with over the years, I'm very confident that Ned's Q&A and his talk will have a significant ripple effect throughout the community as we look, 5 years out, 10 years out. And he's one of those individuals that kind of flew under the radar when he came to the event. And that is what excites me most. When we did MMT in Cabo in 2019, we had a gentleman named Jim Estel, who is an incredible entrepreneur. And the best part was he came to the event, played full out, just like every member did. So people all assumed he was just, an attendee of MMT. And then on the final day, brought him on stage, and people found out that he built a company from the back of his car to $2 billion a year, had personally funded 150 Syrian refugees to come to Canada, provided them with housing. He was just an incredible, incredible entrepreneur, won the Order of Canada. And it's just a really cool environment where that can happen. Or Daryl Davis, who joined us at MMT Palmetto Bluff and participated in one of the mastermind dinners that we did, the welcome dinner. And then on the morning of kind of day one, I brought him on stage for him to share his journey and experience getting over 200 members of the Ku Klux Klan to hand over their robes to him and ultimately leave the Klan. So again, just seeing it on people's faces, to like person I was sitting next to or having dinner with, or whatever the case may be, is actually like this special guest. And again, sometimes they're big names, but the ones I adore the most, the ones I'm most excited about, are the individuals who I can really kind of spotlight and that kind of fly under the radar. What else can I say? Speaking of Q&As, this is an important set of takeaways that may be beneficial to you if Q&As is your thing. So for context, I've facilitated dozens of Q&As over the years. I historically would say that I'm okay at best when it comes to Q&As. For the longest time, I would just chalk up the idea that I'm not good at Q&As and maybe I should bring in somebody else and that kind of stuff. For MMT in 2023, I want to change that narrative, or at least challenge it. And we had a gentleman named Will Guidara, who had just come out with a book called Unreasonable Hospitality, which has since been on the New York Times list, may still be active on the list currently. But he was the former co-owner of the number one restaurant in the world, 11 Madison Park. And I wanted to do a Q&A with him instead of a talk, which was a bit of a surprise for him because everybody else does talks with him. They hire him and he just delivers his 1 hour talk and that's it. But I wanted to do a Q&A. And I put a ridiculous amount of effort and energy into this Q&A, and it was palpable. And what made the Q&A unique was, I guess, three things. One was the preparation. Probably spent close to 100 hours, if not more, on preparing, reading his book, reading his mother-in-law's book, consuming every article I can, every documentary. I went down many rabbit holes for that Q&A. The second component that made that Q&A unique was the introduction. I did a 13-minute introduction, which blew him away. And thankfully it went well, and I'll talk more about that in a second. And then the third thing was, throughout the Q&A, I actually supported it with slides that I had queued up on my iPad, which was really unique because he'd be talking about something about like a past employee, and then I pull up his employee on the screen and he'd be shocked by it. So his whole Q&A was filled with moments of surprise and delight, and being the number one person in the world when it comes to teaching hospitality, I was hoping to give him a little bit of a taste of that as well. And that Q&A had rave reviews from our members, and arguably one of the highest mentioned thing publicly, highest rated sessions from any MMT. And leaning into Del Mar, I wanted to see, well, what happens if I treated things a little differently? Still do a lot of prep. However, the introduction, instead of 13 minutes, maybe I'll make it 90 seconds. And instead of owning the Q&A, because for the Q&A I did with Will Guidara, I didn't open it up to the audience. That is incredibly uncommon when somebody hosts a Q&A. Usually they ask like a couple questions and then throw it to the audience. I owned that entire Q&A. For Del Mar, with Rhonda and with Ned, I decided that I was going to ask the first question and then put it to the audience. And honestly, knowing what I know now, I will probably revert back to what I did with Will, which is again tremendous amount of prep and that kind of stuff, a really elaborate introduction, and then owning the Q&A from beginning to end. Let me focus on the introduction real quick. So I was inspired to do a lighter introduction by a friend of mine who is arguably one of the most decorated storytellers in the world. And he would say to me that like when I'm introduced to go on stage, I like literally tell them to downplay me as much as possible. Like I've literally told people, this is so and so. He's one level above an idiot, so that when I go on stage, the expectation is low, and then I can win them over. So for me, that's what I was trying to embrace, and not doing my 13-minute or even a abbreviated version of that like beautiful, introduction that I've done historically. I've had members say like, we really missed that. And that like, that is so, I understand like the feedback of like setting the bar low and all that kind of stuff, but those introductions are so uniquely you. And on, I guess through that same lens, when I do those introductions, and I've done them virtually as well. They really do a couple things. One is they make the person I'm doing the Q&A with feel seen, feel heard, feel appreciated. Well, maybe not the heard part. That's part of the actual Q&A, but feel seen and feel appreciated. And also signals to them really quickly that this is not a standard run-of-the-mill Q&A. So it really gets them like excited, on edge. I pull up pictures from their childhood, pictures of their parents, just everything I can kind of dig up. And it's funny, Rhonda, when I introduced her to everyone, I did like, again, a 90-second introduction. And she's like, that's the best introduction I ever had. And I was like, man, that's nothing. You don't even know what I'm capable of. So that is something I'm going to revert back to, is like really doubling down on those introductions, and then also owning the Q&A from beginning to end. And I think this is really important. Again, it's very different than how most people do it. And I had hesitations around this, and they were confirmed. For me, when I'm getting ready to facilitate a Q&A, I am just painstakingly like focused for hours on end when it comes to crafting the perfect question that can appeal to a lot of people in the room. And I'm also like almost like setting up, for the most part, I know the answers within 80%. So I'm almost like giving, the person I'm doing the Q&A with like an alley-oop. And when in the moment, so we have that level of like prep and care that me as the moderator will do. And in contrast, what most people do and what I did for Del Mar was I handed the baton to people that took the conversation in, a bunch of different directions. Some of those directions were a little more self-serving than others. And also like on the spot, they're not going to have the same level of like thought and care and that kind of stuff to craft the questions I would on my own. So for that reason, I'm going to revert back to the idea of really owning the Q&A. I'm not going to say I'm not going to open it up to the audience or any of that kind of stuff in the future, but I'm going to do it in a much more kind of thoughtful fashion and have that in my back pocket, because when I reflect back on the Q&A with Rhonda specifically, there was definitely conversations that I know would have been really beneficial to those in the room, but we stayed on one topic for the majority of the night. And I think that was a bit of a miss. Never came through on any of the feedback forms, but that's just my own kind of personal experience and my own refinement that I will be applying in the future. That's it. So in the next video, it's going to be the third post of this 5-part series. I'm going to share a talk that I delivered, which drove a lot more of an emotional reaction from our members than I was originally anticipating. And then I will share as well why we opted for offsite activities instead of more time in the conference room on the afternoon of day 2. So join us on the part 3 of this series. And if you haven't watched part 1, go back and watch that.